Hey Nils, happy to have you today for this new episode of ProdCamp Podcast, where we'll be talking about tips for product leaders' resume. The idea is that you have an extensive background in coaching product managers, building resume, and applying for new roles. So I will throw you the ball so you can, introduce yourself for a second and tell us why we should listen to you on this topic.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for having me, Mate. So my name is Nils Davis, as you said. I've been a product manager for something like 30 years. I started a long, long time ago, but before anybody knew what it was. And over that time, I've done lots of thinking about product management, but also learning about, in particular, one of the big areas where product managers often don't know enough and don't do enough is go to market around how to sell products, right? And then after my last job ended, I went and started to try to do some coaching. I started to try to become a professional coach. Well, it turns out that product managers don't really want coaching, but you know who does? Job seekers. They need help with their resumes. So I have now a resume coaching business, and I don't have really an HR background at all. I'm coming at this strictly from being a product manager. So I focus on product managers and also being somebody who's excellent or skilled and knowledgeable about go to market. Because when you're thinking about getting a job, what you're really doing is you're trying to sell yourself. Your resume is like a sales page, and like a sales page, it needs to perform in certain ways. Your goal with the sales page is to get somebody to click, to either start the free trial or to buy. Your goal with the resume is to get someone to do the free trial, which is get you into an interview, right? It's not to get you the job necessarily, but to get you the interview. And I think when you start to think about your resume as a sales page, it really changes the way that you think about what should show up on there. And this aligns to some degree with the way some people talk about resumes, but most people are not looking at resumes from this standpoint. And so that's what I've been doing. And I'm really happy to talk about that, all the different ideas that sort of combine and some do's and don'ts for product leaders and actually really any product people or anyone who's making a resume. Really, these ideas apply across the board.
Right, and I love how your experience, shaped your approach to this service you're offering now, and to the value it brings for product leaders. So, maybe we can get started with you telling us some of the key elements that every product leader resume should include, especially maybe in the B2B sector, right?
Sure. I think one of the fundamental things is that, again, to think of your resume as a sales page, what are the characteristics of a good sales page? Well, first of all, a really good sales page is very well written and it keeps people reading. One of the things that happens when a hiring manager or a recruiter is reading your resume is their first trip through it is very quick, and they'll make the decision to put it on the let me learn more or I don't want this person. That decision is very fast. It's 6 to 10 seconds. And so you need to make sure that in that 6 to 10 seconds that the reader gets the message that you're the type of person they're looking for, that there's potentially some reason to consider you more. You don't have to prove the whole thing in the 6 to 10 seconds, but you need to not disqualify yourself. And there's different ways you can do that. In particular, clarity is a real problem. And I see lots of resumes that are where somebody wants to be a product manager and their resume says that they're an experienced product strategist. Well, the hiring manager is not hiring for a product strategist. And in particular, the recruiter who might be reading it before handing it to the hiring manager really doesn't even know what a product strategist is. Well, nobody does really. And so, that's going to put your resume on the discard pile. So you have to be super clear. Another thing is I believe a lot in the idea of show, don't tell. Lots of resumes start out with, I am a customer obsessed product manager or data obsessed or data driven, right? And that data driven or customer obsessed, that's like telling somebody what you are. You really want that to show up later in the resume. And instead, you just say, I am a senior product manager with X years of experience. And then you show that you're data driven by the accomplishments that you've had or the impacts that you've had later on in the resume. The other thing that a lot of resumes have is right up at the beginning, they have a big skills section with lots of things, lots of random skills listed, usually taken off of the job description. The problem with that is it's not really accessible to a human reader. So I always say, think about making at least the first half page of your resume focused on the human reader so that you can engage them and persuade them that they should keep reading, or they should put you on the pile of resumes that they're going to drill down into deeper. And so you want to avoid things that are going to annoy them. And this is actually a subconscious thing. You don't want to annoy their subconscious. It's just like you want to make sure you don't have typos in your resume. And that's not because typos are that bad. It's because people hate typos. And so they're going to immediately have a negative reaction to you. And they're going to have a negative reaction to you if your resume is hard to read, or if it's not clear, or if they have to think. And so this whole idea about clarity and not trying to pretend that you are something that you can't show, all those things are initial things to take into account when you're doing your resume. So that accounts for the first 10 seconds. And then there's more. The final thing is, and this is a big problem, most resumes people list in the work experience section in their bullets, they list essentially their job responsibilities or the duties of their role. And the fact is that those are not differentiating. No one who's a legitimate candidate for that role will not have done those exact same things. And so what you really want to have those bullets do is talk about the impacts that you've had on the business that you've been working for. And what that usually means is there was some problem, you did something, and that problem was resolved. In other words, there's a story about some big success you've had, and you've encapsulated that into a little bullet. That turns out to be challenging to do. First of all, people are bad at telling those stories about themselves, even though they have them. I talk to lots of product managers, and I've literally had product managers in tears because they realized how big an impact they had that they hadn't recognized before. I mean, it's amazing to me that people don't really recognize what their actions have taken, what impact their actions have had. But once they realize that, and then once we can encapsulate that into a little bullet, that makes a gigantic difference in people's resumes and in their confidence about themselves.
Lots of good things here. Start by not disqualifying yourself, right?
Exactly.
That's a good one, and I like the example you gave. Show, don't tell. Like if you are data driven, then insert some data or some statistics there instead of just saying it. Love that too, and recognize your impact and communicate on it instead of just task or skills that would be relevant and probably shared by anyone else in the industry or in this applicant role. So really love that. Grounded. Maybe what is the best way to showcase those achievements and demonstrate success in product leadership? Do you have any specific tips to do that?
So what I recommend is, it's related to what I just talked about. It's to really understand and articulate the stories of what you accomplished. Or maybe you could say, recognize the impact you've had, figure it out. And the way to figure it out, though, is to actually articulate the stories. This is based on a very fundamental structure of stories. It's straightforward, not necessarily easy to do, but not that hard once you know. And a good story starts with an important problem, a problem we're solving. And then the next part of the story is trying to solve that problem. And it's usually challenging and there's obstacles. And then after the problem is solved, there's some kind of a transformation. And in the context of most business stories, the problems are actually mostly similar. There's typically like a set of 7 or 8 different problems that might be occurring. The things that product managers do are actually, that's the easy part for most product managers. They're happy to talk about what they did. And then the transformation, again, there's like a handful or 7 or 8 different types of transformation that can happen. And I'll just give you a few examples. So one type of problem we're solving is we're losing market share to competitors. Another type of problem we're solving that can be happening is our customer satisfaction scores are dropping. Another type of problem that can be happening is we aren't making quota. We're not making sales quota. And so if that continues on, then there's going to be layoffs and people are going to get fired or the company's going to go out of business. Those are 3 examples of problems we're solving in a company. And those are often things that product managers have a lot of influence over, right? So we're losing market share because we're being beaten by competitors. And so the product manager comes up with a new product or a new component that addresses the missing pieces, and often they do that by researching what's wrong and using data to figure out what's the next thing to do, what's the right thing to do, and then they drive their team to develop that and they take it to market, and then it's very successful. And not only at the end of that do they start growing revenue and growing market share, but the sales director gets a promotion because they started hitting quota. And maybe somebody got recognition for doing this. Maybe the product manager or the team was mentioned in the company sales meeting or in the company all hands meeting that we're so thankful that these folks did this, created this component that's now enabling us to beat our competitors more, right? So all those different things can happen as a result of something you do, and that's a story of impact. So I told like the whole story, right, in great detail. The next challenge is to turn that into a little short 3 or 4 line bullet that goes in your resume. But if your resume has a few bullets that says, hey, sales was tanking, I did this thing, and now as a result we're beating our competitors and growing market share, if you can say that a few times, then that's going to be an impressive bunch of stories, an impressive resume. In terms of being a leader, oftentimes what that's going to be is we were, overwhelmed with the amount of work we had to do. So what I did was recruited a bunch of people and I got them working together really effectively. Or another alternative type of problem there is often, well, we had this big team, but we weren't actually creating any value in the market. And so what I did was did a bunch of team changing things. And now as a result, our releases are going out, our customer stats going up, blah, blah, blah. And so that would be another, for a leader in particular, that would be the type of story that you'd want to be able to tell, or I came into a company that had no product management function and I built it. And as a result, again, it's always important to say there was this bad thing before, I did a thing, and as a result, there's this good stuff happening. It's not very nearly as effective to say, I did a bunch of stuff and now good things are happening. Because I don't know the context of that good stuff, right? It's like if you say, well, I created this new product and took it to market and now sales are up 10%. Well, I don't know if 10% is as the reader, I don't know if 10% is that impressive. It might be that the market grew at 10% at the same time, which means that your growth was actually at 0, your additional growth, right? But it might be that if you were losing market share before or never hitting quota, and you did this feature and now you started hitting quota, I don't actually care what the percentage growth is. I'm impressed that you're now hitting quota. That's much more meaningful to a reader. It makes a lot more sense to me. I don't have to guess. I don't have to make any inferences.
Great examples. Thank you for sharing those, and we'll remember to be specific about the problem and the impact and tell the story right. So that's what I heard here. I'm talking very often with product leaders and product people in general, and I've seen different type of approach to tailoring the resume to the specific application and the specific job. I've been seeing people spending literally weeks just tailoring the resume and building a specific portfolio for this and all these kind of things. And sometimes just, tailoring the cover letter, and that's pretty much it. What advice can you give for this?
This is a little bit of a tricky one, but I think you have to do this. If it's a job, particularly if it's a job you really are interested in, it pays to do a lot of tailoring. But again, thinking about the tailoring from the standpoint of the hiring manager, they're looking for a person that can do a particular thing. And they have a set of problems that they need solving. Now, you don't know what those problems are because they don't show up on the job description. In fact, the job description is pretty useless to understand anything about the job. Don't worry too much about the job, is my opinion, right? The job description may give you some sense of like the tech stack that's in use, which of course shouldn't really matter to us as product managers anyway, but it often does. I mean, people think it's important. What I say is, don't mistake the job description for what the hiring manager really wants or needs. They have problems that are not going to show up on the, like I gave the example of losing market share. No job description is ever going to say, I need to hire a product manager because I'm losing market share. But that may be what's happening, right? So that's one aspect of it. So you have to think outside the job description in terms of how how you customize your resume. And it may be that you choose particular stories based on the research you do about the company. What's going on with that company in the market? Did they have a good quarter recently? Did they have a bad quarter? Did they just get a bunch of funding? Right? If they just got a bunch of funding, then they may actually be looking for somebody to build something brand new. And so you may want to have stories about when you built something brand new from 0 to 1. If they had a bad quarter, you may want to have stories about how you helped turn around a product by fixing go-to-market, right? So those are some of the things you need to be looking at. Again, those are not showing up on the job description. Another thing that you need to think about is in the very beginning of the resume, and I recommend having a little short summary. It's essentially 3 lines. I have done, and I have a reputation for. I didn't really mention the fact that you do have opportunities to differentiate yourself on the resume, and I have a reputation for is one way to do that. But we'll talk about the first 2 sentences first. I am a. So when I talk about myself on a resume, I say I am an enterprise software product manager with 25 years of experience in HR tools and whatever, right? And what that does is it says I have this domain background, I have this level of experience, I'm going for a particular role in enterprise software, right? If I'm applying for a job in fintech people really like to see that you have some experience in fintech because they think you have to be super smart. So I might add something about if I was going into fintech and I don't have fintech experience, I might add something about I have experience with highly complicated algorithms or highly complex algorithms. Or I might add that I've worked in highly regulated industries because fintech is highly regulated, even if I don't have fintech experience. I wouldn't say that I have fintech experience because I don't, because that would be lying. You can't really lie, but you can you can figure out what parts of your truth you put on there, and you can also leave stuff off if you don't want it on there. Like if you're going for a B2B job and you have some B2C experience, you don't have to mention the B2C experience if you don't want. In the summary, at any rate, you're going to have it later on, most likely. The second sentence, so that's the first sentence, I am a, and you want the I am a to, as I say, to align with what the hiring manager is looking for. Job, just the title and the domain and the experience, you want those all to be in there. In the second sentence, which is I have done, that is meant to show I know what this job entails. Like for me, I always say I have led the release of dozens of products and hundreds of features from concept to market acceptance. That just says, I know what the job of product management entails. And so you can read that sentence and you can say, okay, I'm going to wait for him to show me how he did that and the rest of it. But at least I know that this person understands the job. And then I have a reputation for sentence, and that's meant to be a differentiator. And so it should be not something that every other product manager can claim. It certainly should not say I'm a data obsessed, whatever. It should be something that actually makes you a little bit different from all the other people that are being, it could be related to, I often say to people that come into product management from a non-technical background or from an unusual background, like I was talking to a guy who's a CPA. I would say I have a reputation for bringing my financial analysis skills to bear on difficult, complex problems in product management or something like that. I don't remember the exact words, but that's the point, is that you have then that opportunity to have a differentiator, which of course is a really important part of a sales page, which again brings us back to my overall model for what a resume needs to do or is trying to accomplish. It's trying to differentiate you. It's trying to show you're the right thing. It's trying to show you're the solution to the problems that this person has, even if they don't necessarily know what the problems are or haven't mentioned them in the job description.
Love it. Great advice. Do not rely on job description. And you shared a few things we should be looking at instead to build and tailor this resume. What maybe, because you've seen so many resume and you work with so many product people, what are the common mistakes you see product leaders specifically, but maybe product manager in general, and how they can be maybe avoided?
All of the advice I'm giving is based on seeing what people's resumes do, right? So the first thing so oftentimes they don't have a summary at all. I think that's a problem, right? Because there's no way for the reader to orientate themselves into what what this person does. They go right into the experience section. So that's one extreme. Another extreme is that they have like a fancy formatted resume that's got multiple columns, and it's like, when you read it, it's like, okay, what do I read first? What's the information flow here? What's the information hierarchy? That's a problem. I think you should just have a very simple linear resume. I think that's the easiest thing for everybody. It fits exactly into what they think of as a resume, which means you're not messing with their subconscious that says, well, this isn't what I expected, right? A lot of what you're trying to do is manage the subconscious of the reader so they don't say, oh, I'm annoyed with this, right? You want to avoid annoying the subconscious. And that's a very simplistic model of how the subconscious works, but it's not that wrong, right? You just basically don't want to annoy the subconscious. You want it, and that's why you also want to be super clear. And you don't want to do things like say, I'm super experienced, data obsessed product manager, because the subconscious is going to react to that like that person is bragging, or they're going to say, why should I believe that, right? So you're already setting up doubts if you do that. So don't put those qualifiers in. Just say, I'm a product manager and I have these many years of experience in these domains. Don't lie, obviously, but that's very easy and clear. There's no like, oh, this person is trying to make themselves sound better than they are. No, this is the reason that I keep reading, is because this person sounds like, if everything else lines up, this is what I'm looking for. So that's what you want to go for. So clarity is really important, not bragging, really important. And now some people I think feel like, oh, I have a reputation for is like bragging, but it's not bragging. It shouldn't be. It should be like a thing that people actually like working with you because of this thing, right? Or that you actually bring value because of this thing. You do want to demonstrate it throughout the rest of the resume. Another big thing, I do not recommend at all putting a lot of keywords into the resume, except maybe in a special section that's just skills. And if you think about a sales page, so sales page, the first part of a sales page does not have any keywords or whatever the equivalent of that is. It doesn't have specifications in it. There's a separate section of the sales page that says, here's the specs for this product, right? If you think about an Apple MacBook Pro sales page, there's no section in the first part of it. It doesn't say, oh, it has 3 USB ports and it doesn't, and all this stuff. There's a separate section that says, here's the specs. Oh, 3 USB ports, 3 USB-C ports. That goes in its own place. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is it doesn't really fit into the flow of why the MacBook Pro is so great. And the second reason is you want to be able to actually find all that stuff if you're actually interested, which many people are not. When I get my next MacBook Pro, I'm going to get whatever ports it has. That's the way it goes. I'm not using ports to decide if I'm going to get a MacBook Pro. I have a whole lot of other reasons to decide on a MacBook Pro, and that should be true of your resume as well. So the other really big problem, though, is something I mentioned earlier, is people putting their job description or their role, what's the word I'm looking for? The job duties or their responsibilities as the bullets, and not having. And I think of there as being three levels of bullet. There's the job description or role description. I led the team. I led an agile team. There's what I call an accomplishment. I led an agile team to get 10% faster. And then there's the impact version of the bullet. I took a team that was underperforming and failed to deliver anything for a year, and I got the team to work, and now we're producing 10 times more, 5 times more than we ever produced. That's an impact, right? It's like there was a bad thing, I did a thing, and then there were really good outcomes. So don't list your job duties or the responsibilities of your role, because those aren't interesting. I always say try to avoid using double-digit percentage improvements, at least if you don't put context around them. So like, I increased sales by 10%. That's usually not that interesting. I would say even, there's lots of other metrics where if you do some additional work and some thinking and some arithmetic, you can usually come up with a better way of expressing that metric, either in context of a business improvement, like we weren't hitting quota, now we are, or you often can find out that a 10% improvement in something is also a factor of 5 improvement in something else, or a factor of 5 reduction in something else. I'll give you a real simple example of that. So back in the 2000s, I worked for a company called NetIQ, and we had a system management product that helped you keep your Windows NT servers, this was very long ago, kept them running, kept them up. So without monitoring, Windows NT servers typically were down around 20%. They had about 80% uptime. And so you bring in App Manager, my product, and you suddenly go to 99.9% uptime. Not necessarily 5 nines, but much, much better. So that's a 20% improvement in uptime, right? 80 to 99.9. But if you reverse it the other way and look at downtime, it was a factor of 200 improvement in downtime or reduction in downtime. That's a lot more meaningful to say a factor of 200 in terms of downtime than to say 20% improvement in uptime. So there's very often you can figure out a way to talk about the same metric, but in a way that makes it sound a lot better. This is true for customer satisfaction. It's true for churn and retention, and often for profits, and certainly downtime and uptime is a great example. So I would recommend trying to avoid double-digit percentage improvements in things and find another way of saying it that's more impressive.
Love it. And we get advice even outside of just the resume building, because this could apply to just presenting stats data to a board or to your team. So love it.
Let me just make a point about that. Almost everything I have said applies to things that aren't resumes as well, right? If you're presenting to anybody, clarity is really, really useful. Guiding people through the process is incredibly important. Not making their subconscious annoyed is very, very important. All of these things are true. In fact, this fundamental story structure turns out to be the core component of being persuasive and influential. If you can learn how to use this story structure, problem, solution, transformation, you're going to have all these persuasion powers that you didn't have before that are applicable throughout the product management role. You can use them to motivate your developers. You can use them to get the executives to fund your project. You, of course, use it for selling your product, right? You can use it to get the sales to be more impactful on selling your product. If you give them the good stories, they'll be better at selling. So everything I'm saying, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning that a lot of what I did was look at go-to-market, because I didn't know how to do it until I basically had to figure it out. In around 2011, I had a product that had failed, and I was trying to figure out why it had failed. And I realized that it was because we did bad go-to-market. We were not telling the stories correctly. We weren't expressing the transformation that people were going to get. We didn't really articulate their problems very well, so they didn't know that they could even solve those problems, right? So we were messing up on every single thing. And in retrospect, I figured that out. And I thought, oh, well, this is a pretty useful set of things to know about. And then when I started looking at resumes, I thought, oh, this exact thing is happening on people's resumes. So let's figure out how to apply first principles, essentially, of persuasion and sales to a resume. So there's lots of rules that you hear about resumes, like, oh, your bullet should be short, 1 or 2 lines. That's not true, because you cannot tell a story in 1 or 2 lines. It's just, occasionally you can luck into telling a good story in 1 or 2 lines, but generally speaking, don't limit yourself to 1 or 2 lines, because that means you will not be able to show your impact. At most, you'll be able to show an accomplishment. Same thing. There's always people trying to get their resume onto 1 page. Well, if it's your first job out of college, maybe 1 page is fine because you haven't done much. But that is certainly not something you want to limit yourself with once you have a few years of experience and a few jobs. It just is a dumb limitation. There's no reason. Particularly when people are looking at your resume online on the screen, they can scroll to the end really easily. It doesn't matter if it's only 1 page. Nobody gives you any points for it being on 1 page. Another thing and this doesn't apply to leaders so much, but people just graduated, they always put their education right at the top because that's the thing they're most proud of, right? Well, it doesn't go there. And particularly after you've had your first job out of school, you put your education at the end. That you always do. Now, I did actually advise one person the other day who's actually in school and getting their master's degree to put that as the current work experience, just to hold the place, because their last job ended in 2022. And why do they not have anything between now 2022 and now? It's because they're in school. So let's just list that in school, getting a master's degree, and then but just short. I have a lot of advice, Mate.
Thank you.
Most resumes, unfortunately, I'm very sorry to say this, that I see anyway, are terrible. They really are bad because they don't do any of these things, and they follow these old rules that just are not. They're meaningless. The 1-line bullets and the 1 page. They're just causing people to make stupid resumes that don't work. So I'm
It's
trying to get
really
people to write good ones.
Thank you for that. It's really interesting, and especially the last thing I picked up is the no need for one page or CV. I've heard so many things about that, and recently, even this year, by some coach, even on LinkedIn or stuff like that, that were exactly saying the opposite. So it's interesting. You advocate against the fact that we need to limit ourselves to the one page or CV, at least if we are not out of college. I understood that, and when we are starting to get some experience, obviously. But that does make a lot of sense. We are approaching the end of the interview, Nils, and you already gave us so many insights, so many advice. I'm really thankful. I'm sure the audience will be as well. Any maybe last final advice you could give the people listening to us about their resume building, career search in general, building impactful resume?
Well, so I'll just summarize sort of what I said. Make it super clear. Don't put a bunch of qualifiers in. One thing I always recommend, and we should be able to do this as product managers anyway, put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes and look at it from their perspective. What do they know? What is, we always suffer from the curse of knowledge as well, because we know everything about ourselves. And so we may put things on there that seem obvious to us, but to the hiring manager, they're going to say, I don't understand that. I see this a lot with acronyms. People put acronyms on their resumes. And even if they're going for a job in the domain that they learn this acronym in, the hiring manager may not know, and certainly the recruiter may not know their acronym, right? So that's a simple thing. Be very, very clear. Make sure that there's anything confusing that you fix it. Show, don't tell. I already mentioned that. Don't say that you're experienced. Show that you have experience, right? It's not a data sheet, so don't list everything there is to know. List the impacts that you've had. That's much more meaningful. Don't list your job responsibilities or your job duties, because that doesn't tell the hiring manager anything. And don't mistake the job description for what the hiring manager really needs or wants, right? They have a real problem. You can probably make progress by inferring what that is or guessing at it. And there's only a handful of, there's like 7 or 8 problems that everybody has, which is why they're hiring, And so make sure you have stories that talk about that, and make sure your impact is shown in these little mini stories. Again, it's hard to write those. It's hard to get them short. It's relatively easy to write them, but it's hard to get them short. But it's really worth doing. I find actually ChatGPT is very helpful for that, by the way. If you can write your long story, then you can actually have ChatGPT to help you shorten it. One of the things it often hates to do is it hates to include the problem part of the story, so you have to remind it or do editing. The one other thing I wanted to mention that's related to readability, and it's also related to this thing of getting your resume onto one page. There's a rule of thumb that to be readable, a line of text should be 85 characters or less. And if you look at a lot of resumes, because they tried to get everything onto one page, they made the font small, the margins narrow, and so there's really long lines, which makes it really hard to read. And if you think about it as yourself, as a human being, and you look at this resume, it looks like a wall of text that you do not want to look at. So the general rule of thumb is don't make your resume look like somebody wouldn't want to read. Make it look accessible and like it's not going to be a terrible pain in the butt to read. So that's a final thing. Make it look nice. Make it easy to read.
Thank you, Nils.
So there's format and content. Both of them play. They're both really important. So anyway.
Thank you. Really, the advice, the insights, the big dose of common sense. You made us, I think, realize that we have a lot of the tools needed to build an impactful resume already in our toolbox, and we can just use them and call for someone like you to help, if anything, right?
That's right.
Thank you so much, Nils. It was a pleasure.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Mate.